Hey guys, so I know in the last video I ran through things pretty quickly, and I mostly did that just because um, I felt like a lot of times these videos get to be a little too long, and that if I just showed that Kinto could be installed in less than a minute, it would convince a lot of people to give it a try. Because I know, previously speaking, Kinto during the setup, a script would ask you a few different questions, and you'd have to answer them right to get everything to configure. And having removed a lot of that, I felt like it was time to make a new video, let people know that a new update has been pushed out that resolves that to a point where you really can't get the setup wrong. And even if you do, it's not a big deal because you don't have to reinstall the program and take a minute or so of your life trying to figure out the right key presses. With this new update, essentially you can go into the customize section if you're looking at the system tray, and there's tweaks. And this is where a lot of those questions during the original setup would occur. So anything that I might have asked you previously now shows up here. So things like some multi-language users really appreciate this one because they want that Alt key right next to the right part of their space bar to be that key that allows them to apply accents and various things to their typing. So that's available. I don't use any other language than English on my keyboard, so I can't really experience it firsthand. But from what I hear, this resolves the issue for quite a few people. And then one thing I do make heavy use of personally is usually this one, the ST3 hotkeys for VS Code, which just means that whatever hotkeys you might be used to in Sublime Text, you'll be able to carry that right on over to Visual Studio Code for Microsoft. And you don't have to rewire your brain to highlight, all similar words or whatever it is that you might be trying to do. Because there are some hotkey differences between the two programs, and that just resolves it completely for me. Another thing I noticed that I often got requests for were these next two, rebinding caps lock to the command key in particular, or control, however you want to think of it. But that was something that came up pretty often. And one thing I even took the time to do is make sure that if you do check one of these, you can't possibly enable the other one unless you go back in and disable it. And same thing with that one. And the main difference between the two is that the one above it allows it to be escape if you just tap caps lock quickly. Otherwise, if you hold down, then it acts like a command or a control key, essentially. So one thing that people will notice that I often do too is I begin to just refer to the key that is essentially the primary modifier as command. But virtually speaking, obviously in Linux, your primary modifier is the control key. But so there you go. I'm just going to uncheck all that. Actually, I may just leave that one enabled. And then you can close it. And over on this window here, you can clearly see that the service is actually restarting itself. And that's completely normal. And then it comes right back, it turns green, and then that's solid white again. So now you have your Sublime Text hotkeys ready for Visual's VS Code. So the other thing is, compared to this pop-out menu here that has customize, you have all the same options over here, but it's put under edit, and the two check mark options for auto start and enabling the tray exist right over here as well. So the placements are mostly the same, but I do try to kind of conform to the expectations of a full-on app, which typically always has your file and edit. And I felt it was more appropriate to use edit in that case. Whereas on system trays, I don't often see that same type of menu structure, so it just didn't make sense to have an edit here because you don't have a file. Obviously, what would typically be file is just right here. But everything else I pretty well kept the same. And then any change you make on either the full GUI program or in the system tray, they auto-populate into one another. So you don't have to worry too much about something getting out of sync or having to restart one program or the other. And that was kind of interesting too, because during development, I actually had the system tray ready first, and I was about to deploy the program. And then I realized that there were GNOME 3 and KDE that were particularly problematic when it came to the system tray. Although I've noticed here recently that ubuntuhandbook.org did an unexpected review of this program, and they did a pretty good review, and they had screenshots of it and everything. And I noticed in their screenshots they actually had the system tray working, which surprised me. I honestly don't know how they pulled that off. I assume that the author must have had a third-party extension installed and enabled when he was doing the review. He might not even notice the fact that regular users, as far as I know, on Ubuntu 20.4, because that's how it works for me, the system trays just aren't there. I tried installing what I thought was probably the best supported app indicator package for 20.04. I couldn't get it to work at all, and I've tried getting them to work in the past without any success. What I ended up using, though, I did find Top Icon Plus, I think is what it was called, and that actually let me have the system tray in the regular Ubuntu 20.04. Of course, this is Ubuntu Budgie 20.04, and it fully supports app indicators just fine. So you're not dealing with you are still dealing with a GNOME shell in some cases, but it's Budgie for the most part. So you're not dealing with the full-on GNOME 3 stuff like you typically would be. And I am really disappointed, though, that app indicators and the API for it appears to be getting shuttered on the GNOME 3 side of things. I'm sure people are going to try and work out workarounds and create extensions for it for quite a while. For me, it's just hard to imagine an operating system all that useful without system trays. And this app in particular, it obviously benefits from having a system tray, although for most of its life, it's not had a system tray until very recently. But I always wanted to get to this point with it. I just wanted to make sure that the program, as far as on the back end of things, was as solid as possible, and that the majority, if not all, of the most basic hotkey remappings were taken care of. I really didn't want to deploy something with a full-on GUI and a system tray if there were things lacking. That's just it. While it may be more appealing to people as the programmer and maintainer of the project, I would much rather know and be confident that the program as a whole is as solid as what I would like it to be before going down that road. And I certainly feel like I've reached that point with the project now. And in fact, I feel like there's a lot more features that I could add to it now that I have a full-on GUI and the system tray and a structure worked out for that, more or less. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of in this program is how I deal with toggling features on and off. I use some regex for that, regex formulas, and they work really well. That's probably one thing that's surprised me the most with this project, is that while I've used regex in the past, I've never used it to the extent in which I use it in this project. It's really on a whole nother level. And some of the regex is fairly complicated, to be honest. However, there is a purpose. So I don't just do it because I'm trying to be clever. But if you look at some of this on setting the keyboards, you can see, I guess, what I'm kind of talking about and referring to, especially when you get over to the part where you start doing what's called substitutions. And I may create a separate video that breaks this down more fully, because it's really hard unless I have it set up ahead of time to just immediately show you what all this is doing. But essentially, anytime you put things in these brackets here, these semicircle brackets, you're creating a group match in regex, and you can create a series of these. And when you do that, you can also set up these cache symbols with these references to those groups, essentially. And you can write it in such a way where you have even groups of groups in a sense. So you could say like numbers 3 through 8 is multiple groups within the first matching group that you're trying to manipulate. And if nothing matches in that group, then perhaps this next group will be what'll fill in the replacements, more or less. So I guess what I'm saying is you can essentially toggle things on in a very safe manner, because you have this structure built where you're just able to ensure that certain things are off, that need to be off, that could create a conflict, while at the same time, the thing that you're really trying to toggle in an on and off state, you can have this subgrouping within all these groups. And again, I'll just create a separate video for this because it's really hard to describe without actually going through it. The moment I do that, I'm sure the light bulb will go on in a lot of people's heads. Going to be like, oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense to do. But I've never used regex in this manner before, and I'm not sure what really helped me realize that this was even a realistic way of doing it. And essentially what this really does for me, it simplifies the writing of code that I have to do, or the number of references I have to make. In the first use case where this was really useful for me, was on the Windows side. Actually, it wasn't even on the Linux side of this project. Because on the Linux side of the project, for whatever reason, the manipulation and writing of these files happens in such a different way. I've been able to create these more readable regex manipulations and break them down, so I can make multiple file manipulations, one thing after another in a linear fashion, and know that everything's going to happen correctly and not be too concerned about it. But that hadn't been the case on the Windows side of it. I started quickly realizing that trying to use practically the same methods on the Windows side of Kinto was becoming problematic, because anytime I would try to do those same types of reading and writing of the file, things would end up happening out of order. Despite the order that I had programmed it in, which was kind of weird, because it's not like I'm writing to a database and there's a lot of magic happening behind the scenes. You would think that things would complete in the order that you initiate them in, and but this is a problem that, honestly, or this type of problem is something I've actually had to deal with during my career. One of the most difficult problems I had to solve a long time ago was in manufacturing, and I had this really difficult instance where during the manufacture of this product, there were at times a batch of I don't know whether or not I really want to say what it was. But there was a batch of this particular product that would go through this phase where they could basically run them through this oven where they had to bake some paint onto the product. And they could do these in batches of 2 or 4 or probably not 6, but they could do it in batches essentially. And they were trying to track this as it was going through the process. And for whatever reason, once it came out of that oven, they started finding that a lot of these products would come out of order. and so I was tasked with rewriting the kiosk system in such a way where that would not be possible. And because there was just a lot of spaghetti code, and their developers were having a really difficult time trying to maintain and rewrite the problematic part of the code. So they just wanted to scrap the whole thing and rewrite it from the ground up, which is what I ended up doing. And during that process, I actually did discover what the issue was myself, because during my testing, I set up actual development processes and procedures as well to ensure that things are happening properly. And so the key thing that I found out about the entire process in general was that if you were to try and process it one by one, you just didn't know how the database is going to put it in there. So it would cause that product to come out of order. Then you could potentially put on the wrong customizations or changes to the product further down the line, and it could just create a whole slew of problems. And then customers could eventually get shipped the wrong product, and that would be even a bigger issue, because this product was one where it was such a large size you couldn't easily ship it back without a really huge cost to both the people we were selling to or ourselves. Someone would have to eat that cost, or we just discount the product. So yeah, it was critically important to rewrite that. And what I ended up doing in that case was a similar solution as what I've done here, because in this case, I'm essentially writing formulas and regex that are doing things that, typically speaking, most people who are writing regex might do in smaller chunks and bite sizes. And typically you can get away with that. But in this case, I'm just writing it all out at once. And that works out a lot better because I'm not having to maintain a lot of code for this. It just runs once, and I know it gets set right. So I don't have to worry about it too much, whether I'm on the Windows side of it or the Linux side of this application. It runs very well, and it's actually very portable as well. There are differences in the configuration files, just because Windows is using auto hotkey while the Linux side uses X keys now. And initially I was using my own custom C program, but I pretty quickly discovered that KDE and a few other DEs, Budgie even, had some difficulties with my C program, and I could either fix the C program, or around that same time I was looking at this X Keysnell application, which had been around for maybe a couple of years at the time, and I was really blown away by it, because it just had a lot of features and a lot of the things that I would typically want. And when I saw the configuration file, and I'll pull that up here, the way that I could lay it out was so, in my mind, it just looked beautiful. It's Python, and I'm actually I have a slight preference towards JavaScript, but I've written a lot of Python at this point. So whether it's Python or JavaScript, it really doesn't matter a whole lot to me. But looking at this, I felt like it was pretty immediately readable, and compared to what I was doing with JSON and creating configuration files in JSON for my C program, I found that this was even more readable than that, which surprised me. But at the same time, I suppose Python has always been about removing syntactic sugar so that things will typically be more readable. And honestly, I like syntactic sugar. I feel like it gives you a little more freedom in how you can lay out your code, but at the same time, this works really well. And one thing I've done through large chunks of this file is I always put the description off to the right of whatever it is that it's supposed to do. And the default SL just means this is a default system level shortcut. I didn't feel like typing out system level every single time. I don't mind specifying that, hey, this is a default. And as far as I'm concerned, Ubuntu Budgie is the default main operating system that I will always ensure works extremely well with Kinto. I do try to treat Ubuntu and GNOME 3 as first-class citizens as well in general. So if you're on GNOME 3 or Budgie, you should be pretty good. When you start getting out to XFCE, that will generally work pretty well because I also have Chromebooks that have XFCE on it through Gallium OS. So I dog food that quite a bit. The only one I don't dog food on a daily basis is KDE, unfortunately. But I do try to support it as best I can. I know there's probably a lot of, particularly even Mac users, that I would imagine KDE would appeal to. And initially it appealed to me. Quite literally customize anything on that operating system. But as far as programming it via, I guess via the terminal or maybe even debug signals, it feels like that's a little more difficult to do. I mean, you can edit flat files and restart certain processes and things, but in my experience, that's still been a less than desirable experience, just because a lot of times I still have to log out and log back in for my changes to take full effect. Otherwise, I typically experience some weirdness at times when I'm trying to remap keys on it directly. But I do a lot less of that now. So at this point, the only thing that ever gets remapped directly on the system is the overlay key, because I can't really avoid what happens when you hit that super key and then you let up on it. I definitely don't want that menu coming up because the Mac way of it is you hold down Command and the space bar, and then this is supposed to come up essentially. And this is just my default remapping of it. If someone doesn't like this default remapping of it, they can take that out, because that's actually sitting right here. It's just remapping to Alt F1 on Budgie. So and then on other operating systems like XFCE, it's remapping to LC escape. So I mean, typically I wipe out the overlay key completely, and then I'll use another existing hotkey that opens up the application menu, or I'll set a new one. But one thing I don't do is I avoid overriding existing hotkeys at this point. I did a little bit of that in the earlier days, just because it made it a lot simpler, especially when I was trying to support multiple desktop environments, and I was finding that there was just no consensus on what each distro is going to use. So I had to, and it's still up on my issue tickets, I had to create individual columns in a spreadsheet essentially, and lay out exactly what's happening on each desktop environment, and then determine from looking at that what's most common, and to just go with that, saying, okay guys, this is what's going to be the default. I don't care that you want to use some weird other combination, Alt M or Alt L for your launcher. We're going to use like Alt F1 now, or just as an example, or whatever it may be. Minimizing windows and maximizing is another example. The Super H to hide is useful, or to minimize, versus whatever the other key was, Alt F9 maybe. And then to close, of course, you got some that might use super W to close or super Q, or maybe none that do that, but they might use Alt F4, and that one's pretty common on Windows, obviously. And so it's easy on the Windows side of it for Kinto because it's always consistent. But even something as simple as, closing a window doesn't necessarily have a consistent hotkey across all Linux distros. And that's one thing that makes projects like this particularly difficult in trying, is that you have to go through all these different distros and figure out what's happening in them. And in a future update, one thing I would like to do is go ahead and remove actually a lot of what's been written here and replace it with something that's much more dynamic during the setup process at the very least, or perhaps detect anytime you might install a new desktop environment or whatever. But one thing I would prefer to do is to just read dynamically what practically in real time anyways, find out what your actual hotkeys are for your desktop environment, because it's fairly easy to document how to query that and get that information. And once you have that information, I could fairly easily translate that into the appropriate key maps under both this section and a terminals section of this file. And that's another thing that I could probably lay out a little clearer, because there's actually no description here. But if I did add a description, what it should say is something like GUI apps catch-all or something of that nature, so people realize, hey, this is the default. So this is just what's going to happen by default. Now, if you're using a terminal, you're looking at a different set of key maps, and that one is a few blocks down. I have to minimize all these specific programs because I do have exceptions for a lot of these little things. So yeah, down here you have the term string. So this is for all terminals essentially. And if you want to see what all terminals fall under this, you can just scroll on up here and you'll see everything that I've added under the terminal key map. So yeah, I was thinking there might even be one that wasn't technically a terminal. Like I'm trying to remember. Okay, I was thinking of the browsers. I had a user a while back discover that Discord and all these browsers more or less use the same hotkeys. So they put Discord in there. So even though it's not a browser, I allowed it just because it made sense. There's no reason to create a separate group if it practically uses the same hotkeys for all intents and purposes. And then I created a group for VS Codium and code as well, because VS Codium is basically the VS Code without all of the telemetry involved. So if you want one that doesn't have all the Microsoft telemetry, there you go. You can install that, and it works just fine with that. And then in here you can also see what gets toggled whenever you start messing around with the tweaks menu. Which I was showing off earlier, and really, see, I can even just like change the keyboard layout right now. Let's say, then if I look at this file that we've been looking at, it ought to ask to reload it. There we go. So now that we've reloaded the file, we can clearly see that this WinMac category has been enabled. And the reason why it's called WinMac instead of just Win or Windows is because, technically speaking, this remap works for official Apple keyboards if you want it to, but you have to explicitly now go in and enable that part of it. So that's a little different. That's this option right here, and it's not really very well explained, probably. It may be in my README. It should be if it isn't. But the key difference is that if you enable that one, and it's only available on Linux, by the way. Windows does not have apparently an Apple driver that handles it in the same way. But you can essentially swap out your command key and the alt key so that your Apple keyboard has the exact same layout as a Windows keyboard, and you can do that on the driver level instead of doing it with xmodmap or swapping it around using some type of XKB thing. So it happens on an even lower layer of the USB driver, so that it just conforms with the Windows standard. And the reason why I like that at times is because sometimes I'll be doing a lot of work on my MacBook, and then I might go into my office and plug it in to my full desktop. And when I do that, it's important to me to just continue working, and that allows for that because the Apple keyboard is seen the exact same way as a Windows keyboard, and the key map doesn't have to change. It can stay on the Windows key map, and my Apple keyboard just works. The only downside to that is that, and this was a complaint that people had in the past, but the uninstaller handles it a lot better now. But I had it in the past where some people had installed Kinto, and then they removed it, and they found that their keys were swapped on their Apple keyboard, and they didn't have a clue on how that happened. And for the couple of people that posted that, I explained to them what was going on and how to fix it, and I pretty quickly resolved it in Kinto, so that if you officially remove it, that problem wouldn't come up. But at times I would have people that would install the program, and then they would try to manually remove it without going through the uninstaller, and then be upset with me because it just totally screwed up all their hotkeys and their system, and instead of just trying to make a post about it. But I mean, I can understand how frustrating that can be too. It's like you make a post on my GitHub page on the issue tickets, and you might not hear from me for a few hours or over a day, and you're like, hey man, I need to get back to work, and all my hotkeys are screwed up. So I imagine Kinto in some people's minds screwed with them in such a way where they don't want to touch it again. But yeah, it's unfortunate that had ever happened, but that's just part of the process of trying to automate it to the extent where you literally don't have to do any work. Of course, if you do all the work yourself, you fully understand, or you better understand when things are breaking and how they broke, more or less. And it's a little hard to describe everything that's going on sometimes. I wish this was a simpler program in the sense of being able to do all this work with fewer lines of code, and that it was just something that is immediately obvious or easy to do. But this is a problem that's existed for well over a decade, and no one has really tackled it all that well. Every case that I've seen of someone trying to tackle it, whether it's using something like AutoKey or xmodmap or whatever it happens to be, it's not very elegant, and it's just at the end of the day, you're very quickly going to fall out of the illusion that you're using anything that remotely resembles a Mac, just because the moment you go between your regular GUI app and go over to the terminal app, it throws you out of this feeling that you're using something that's really cohesive and just fully works. So you just end up falling out of that. Other things that I guess I really need to go through is the debug and the support about. So if you go into the about menu, you'll clearly see which build you're on and version. And then if you click on support, that'll just open up a link inside of your Firefox web browser or whatever your default is. And excuse me a little bit. I'm running this on a virtual machine that with limited amount of RAM. So well, as far as the virtual machine is concerned, it has a limited amount of RAM. So there it goes. So that's should be opening up, the GitHub support page. see, then there was that debug option. And you can also initiate debug from the system tray as well. It's under the exact same location, debug. There's even an open Kinto option where if you don't have this program open, you can open it up, which, I mean, I could click on it right then too, and it'll just open up another copy. So there's not a whole lot of reason though to open it up a second time. Which I say that, I mean, typically speaking, it opens up another copy. I'm not sure why I still have the one. Oh well. So if I click on debug here though, what ends up happening is it ends the service. So now the second program comes up. Well, I'm going to close out of that. We don't need that. So if I run it in debug mode, what you'll see is it no longer says that it's active. It says inactive, and that's completely normal and fine. And if I go over to this file here, I can actually start pressing some keys and moving my mouse cursor in various directions. And then I come right back over here and I can see that that's being picked up on. One thing that's coming down the road at some point as well through an update is I do have an update in a separate branch, even right now, that'll add in an equal sign and an arrow and what it's transforming it into, so you can even fully understand what it's remapping to. And I feel like that's going to be a pretty nice thing to have. So I probably need to go ahead and merge that into the master branch of hotkeys now, so that when you run through the installer, it'll go ahead and update that side of it as well. You won't necessarily see that update the about menu any, because hotkeys Snell is a separate utility. But I may go ahead and push that update at least out into my fork of their project. I think I've put a pull request out for that particular feature because it's really, it's not a very big feature. So hopefully I can get that upstreamed as well, but it'll definitely be in my fork of it, and I suspect it'll be accepted pretty quickly. Well, the author's not always particularly quick. Sometimes it takes him a few months to get around to it and merge the changes, but I suspect relatively quickly he'll get around to it. And I may hit him up on Twitter. He seems to be fairly accessible. He's a Japanese guy that I've never met. If I ever go to Japan, it'd be pretty cool to sit down with him and have some sake or something, and some sushi. That'd be pretty awesome. But I doubt I'll ever meet him. I think he's out of the Tokyo area. It does surprise me though when you go on Twitter and you see how many people are crazy about their keyboards over there in Japan. I can definitely tell that I think there's a bigger fandom around these mechanical keyboards and happy hacking type keyboards. So, and I think that was even created and invented over there. I know happy hacking keyboards show up in their manga as well. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. So getting on to other parts of this though, I'm going to go ahead and restart the program under File and Restart so that it goes to be green again. And of course, when it's in this mode, when you're typing, it doesn't show you any of what's actually happening. It's just running the service, and it is what it is, and that turns white again. Other things I could show off. I mean, really, I've shown off that menu. There is the edit Kinto config, which just shows you what I already have open here. If it wasn't open already, it would open it up. I can do that with the service file as well. And there you go. So I know on some systems it's possible that parts of the service file just might, for whatever reason, might not be appropriate for your system. I mean, everything that I've tested it on, it appears to be pretty appropriate. And this is one of the changes that actually does need to be worked on for multi-user support down the road. Because right now I'm referencing files and things that exist in your home directory. Some of these things need to be relocated into a more system level global location. Most of this is up until you get to the config file part. once you get there, it sort of breaks down. You're no longer using anything on the system level. So one thing I could certainly do is just start putting things in a system location. But I know it'd probably be better to have it referencing files in your actual home folder if it exists. So what I might end up doing, I suppose what I could do, trying to think about it, I could create a bash file that would see if a config file exists in that location, and if not, then reference one in the main location. I don't know. I'll have to look into it. I mean, if I could do a symlink with a failover or something like that, even so, like if it does exist in your home location, I'll use it. If not, then use the backup. Which it makes it a little more complicated too whenever you start messing with the tweaks menu and all that, because then I have to add in a little extra logic to say, hey, tweak your home folder first if that file exists, otherwise tweak the system level. I might even need to create an option as well that lets you know, hey, are you editing or changing a file that'll be global for any user in context to Kinto, or are you just changing something for your particular user? So there are concerns like that, and once they're fully addressed, the multi-user aspect of the program, I can really start packaging this up and putting it up on my own PPA repo and push it out to hopefully Debian and Ubuntu and Arch and all these various different repos out there. That's definitely something I want to get Kinto out onto. And that's definitely coming now that I think the most difficult aspects of the program have been addressed more or less. The only other thing I can really think of to mention in this video really quickly is that at one time Kinto did have the ability to detect the input caret for browsers and stuff, so that if you had a text field highlighted, it would use the appropriate word-wise type keyboard stuff, which it still does that, the word-wise. If I hold down the command key and then the left or the right arrow, it'll push the cursor to the beginning or end of the line. But what it could use to do as well is if you hold down, if I click out here, then hold down the command key and then hit the left arrow, right now it goes to the top of the page. What it used to do was go back, assuming that there was a place to go back to, which right now there isn't. And that's how it works on a Mac, actually, is that Macs are actually intelligent enough to give you a different set of hotkeys depending on whether or not you have a text field highlighted or not. If you do, then that'll take priority, and your hotkeys may slightly change a little bit. I mean, of course, you'll have access to most of your hotkeys. You just won't have access to the word-wise based hotkeys. And I found that to be really fascinating. And that's just one of those things that's so small, and it seems like an insignificant detail until you start peeling that onion, and then you realize, oh hell, like they're really doing something that the other operating systems aren't in this case. And it's even more useful in context to a laptop too, because it allows them to create a very consistent keyboard for all of their laptops. And this is just something that people don't take into account, is the fact that Apple does a really good job on simplifying their keyboard, and you're really not missing out on anything. And I think a lot of people, when they look at the Apple keyboard, they're like, oh yeah, but now you don't have a page up key, you don't have a home or end key. And it's like, no, you do. You have all these keys. They're not labeled, granted, I'll give them that. They're not labeled, but they're still there, and they're always in sensible locations as well. Which is to say they're on the arrow keys, and it really makes sense. Because if I go over to this document, I can't tell you how much sense it makes to me that if I hold down the command key and hit up, I go to the very top of the document. If I hit down, I go to the very bottom of the document. And then if I'm somewhere else and I just want to go left or right and hold down that command key, I'm now all the way over to the far left of this string, and then exactly the opposite when I hit the right side of it. The fact that the cursor moves around in that fashion, and reliably so, and on my laptop, it makes some intuitive sense, and almost to the point where you're like, okay, it's not a big deal that it's not labeled. Once you do it one time, it's like it's hard to forget that that's how that's mapped. Now, one thing I do forget a little more often is when I hold down the FN key, then the up arrow, it actually gives me a page up and a page down. So it's not going to the very bottom, it's just going one page up or one page down, and that's why I'm holding down the FN key. Now, anytime you do FN stuff, that's not necessarily something that's going to carry over to other laptops. So I will admit I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what Kinto can do in that case, because FN's on a whole nother layer, and there's no way I can manipulate what happens with the FN type stuff. I've had that request a few times, and unfortunately, I've always had to explain to those users, like, I'm really sorry, but your laptop, it's not going to pan out for you, because practically none of them let you remap what the hotkeys are going to be when you hold down that FN key. Lenovo's, they let you swap out the FN and the control key, and that's impressive that they let you do that on the BIOS level. It's not a lot don't let you do that. I don't think I can even do that on my Mac, but yeah, Lenovo's let you do it. System 76 has some new laptops out. They're all Linux-based laptops, if you know anything about System 76. And they actually have a GitHub repo out there where you can download the literal BIOS or firmware, because it's open source for your laptop. And you can remap those FN type based keys however you want. I think you can even swap out the FN and control key. I think everything is fully configurable, and that's pretty rare and and impressive, I have to admit. So when it comes to renewing my laptop at some point, System 76 is definitely going to be high up on my list to be looking at them at some point in the future. I'm trying to think of what other things I might look at. Of course, the silicon based MacBooks will be out, and I'll look at them, but at the same time, without all the ports and accessories that I like to have, especially as someone who occasionally likes to present, that would be difficult for me to get into something without a basic HDMI port. To me, that's pretty important. Of course, there's doggles, but I really don't want to mess with doggles. I ended up going somewhere once where I was going to present, and I was unable to because I didn't have a dongle, and no one there had one. So it was a very awkward and disappointing night for me, needless to say, and probably for the few other people that were there. It wasn't a very big meetup, at least. It would have been pretty horrible if there were like 20 or 50 people there. But I'm also pretty confident that if I was somewhere that had 20 or 50 tech people there, that surely one of them would have shown up with their own laptop bag and maybe a compatible mini display port adapter or whatever it was that I needed that night. That is what I needed that night, was a mini display to HDMI. At the time, I was using a Dell laptop, and it made me really unhappy with that laptop after that. It was the XPS 13 model that a lot of developers like, but and I liked it, but as far as the trackpad was concerned, it caused some weird kernel crashes in Linux, and even panics if you were trying to do a Hackintosh thing. That it wasn't stable. Literally the mouse trackpad was not stable. Of course, nothing quite compares to an official Apple trackpad. Surface is pretty good though. I've been very impressed with the Surface Pros ever since Surface Pro 3. I think I felt like they started getting those done right, for the most part. So yeah, I think at this point I'm just kind of rambling on, and I'll be surprised if anyone has like really listened to this all the way to the end. 'Cause if I hadn't gone off on some of these tangents, I'm sure this would be a much shorter video. So this is probably, I don't know, lasted half an hour or something. But yeah, give it a thumbs up if you like it, and let me know if there's a different type of video you want me to create. I could definitely show off, I guess, more parts of Kinto itself and how I use it. But basically, if you're a Mac user, you're going to be very familiar with it already, and hopefully you'll be pretty happy with what this allows for. So yeah, if you're also just trying to move over to Linux or even Windows a little bit more, this will definitely be helpful, because I technically right now on my laptop I'm running Windows 10 for the most part, and a lot of that's because last time I tried running Linux I had a lot of power issues and fans powering up a lot, and it just wasn't the greatest experience for me on this particular MacBook Pro. And it's a 2017 model, so it's not even one of the more recent models that have even more incompatibility type issues with Linux. So yeah, this might be my last MacBook Pro. I don't ever want to say it's going to be my last one, but I get the feeling that Apple is in this phase or stage where they're not going to be enough for my typical laptop and computing needs. For development, if you want to develop anything for their platform, you pretty well need a Mac, an official one. But you can do the Hackintosh stuff. You're not supposed to, but so yeah, I don't foresee another Mac anytime soon for me. I'm pretty sure I might even try out one of those AMD Ryzens. It seems like AMD's back on top again, and that's pretty impressive to me because the first computer I ever built was an AMD. Back then, I think it was the AMD, I want to say Triathlon. It's the AMD Athlon XP 2100 Plus, if I recall. I try to remember the motherboard, if it might have been one of those NVIDIA Enforce motherboards back then. I know I was able to overclock it a little bit, put some really fast and good RAM into it. That thing was a pretty capable, powerful little machine back in the day. Put one of those ATI all-in-wonder cards that could actually capture stuff, but it was actually a pretty competent gaming card as well. It was the 9600 Pro XT model or something of that nature, and it was great. The capture card, I think, was made by Philips. It was a good quality analog capture card. I guess this was pre-YouTube days even, and I remember just having fun with it and recording some of the PS2 video games I was playing back then, back in the day, and yeah, I had a nice little PDA by one of those Windows Mobile 2003 PDAs, and I'd put video clips of playing those games and showing it off to other people at school. I was in high school at the time, but yeah. So, anyways, I'm just now going down memory lane. But if you like it, let me know. If you don't, let me know that too. I'm always trying to improve this program, and I'll be happy to try to address anything or any complaint that anyone might have. So, all right. So that's Kinto. Thanks.